Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. You are here today for the Rails Online Roundtable about the Census 2020 services and resources. Like I said, we're going to get started in about 1 minute, but if you have a second right now, and you can locate your toolbar up at the top, you should see that there is a chat button. The chat button is something we're going to be using a lot. So this is a way for you to communicate with us as presenters and also with your fellow attendees. So if you locate that and then you type in a message, you can share it with the rest of the audience. If you do so, please note that there's a to field and you need to type in all panelists and attendees. If you just send a message to us as the panelist, only we'll see it. But if you send it to all panelists and attendees, everyone will see it. So if I can ask you all just to introduce yourselves, tell me your name and where you're from, that would be great. That's a kind of great starter, great way to get introduced to everyone here. So I'll do it myself just as an example. Great, thank you. Looks like some of you have already figured it out. That's great. Wonderful. Welcome to everyone. And let's go ahead and get started. Today is, again, our Rails Online Roundtable. Our topic is the Census 2020 services and resources. I'm Dan Bostrom, the Rails Member Engagement Manager. This is our second in a series of 2 Rails Online Roundtables around this topic of the census. If you didn't attend the first one, roundtables might look a little bit different. The emphasis here is on peer-to-peer learning, you learning from your colleagues and your colleagues learning from you. We really want to find out what you know and what you hope to learn. I'm very excited to be joined by my colleagues, Ashley Johnson and Catherine Savage from the Vernon Area Public Library. Ashley and Catherine have been working hard on library census issues. They've been champions for us, and we are really lucky to have them helping out with this conversation and getting everybody interested in this topic. So here is our agenda for today. I'm doing the welcome right now. We'll jump in and do some Rails news and opportunities. In those news and opportunities, I want to tell you about a special grant opportunity that we have, and I have a request for you all. In order to help Rails write this grant, we need your feedback. We want to hear from you. So after we hear about that, Ashley and Catherine are going to do a short presentation. And then the second half is going to be all discussion. This will give you a chance to talk about what's happening in your libraries, talk about what you hope to have happening in your libraries, and then just some back and forth and discussion around this issue of the census. Catherine and Ashley will be participating, but again, we really want this to be a conversation. And at the very end, we'll do a wrap up, and then we'll send you on your way. Please note that this is being recorded, and it will be available from the Rails YouTube page after the live version is over. Okay, so let's jump into some Rails news and opportunities. Before we get to the census stuff, just some updates on Rails projects and things you might want to take advantage of. So continuing education, we have a great workshop coming up in September. This workshop, What Does a Library Marketing Plan Look Like and What Does It Do for You, takes place Thursday, September 26th. This one is happening at the Fountaindale Public Library. We're also hosting the same exact workshop the day before at the Chillicothe Public Library, and that one also takes place at 9:30 to 12:30. Topics will include how to involve library staff in all marketing at all levels and how to create and prioritize goals and timelines. The workshop is presented as part of the Rails My Library Is campaign, and the presenter is Pat Wagner from Pattern Research, Inc. You can sign up via L2. Another learning opportunity we have coming up is Find More Illinois. Find More Illinois is our ILL facilitation tool, and we're giving you a chance to learn a little bit more about how it works. On Monday, August 26th, we're hosting a demonstration webinar where you can find out how the software works and how your library can participate. This webinar will include information about reduced costs for libraries who want to join in FY 2020 and the assistance Rails offers to early adopters. This webinar is just going to be the first of many opportunities that you have to get familiar with Find More Illinois. We also have live demonstrations happening at our East Peoria and Burr Ridge service centers, and a few other dates for an online webinar in September, October, and November. Learn more and sign up via L2. Do you have a long commute like I do? Do you like to spend the long commute listening to podcasts like I do? Then I have something amazing to offer you. Rails has a podcast called Sparks, in which our executive director, Deirdre Brennan, interviews people doing great things in and around libraries. In their most recent episode, Deirdre interviews Megan Swarek, director of the reference services at the Schaumburg Township District Library. They talked about the Panorama Project, which was an effort to measure the impact libraries have on developing readers, driving book discovery, and generating book sales in their local communities and beyond. I highly suggest listening and subscribing, especially for those of you who are stuck on the Kennedy a lot, like me. The next thing I have to tell you about is the My Library Is campaign. This is our campaign to help libraries tell their story, and I want to point out that we set up a blog especially for library stories. In this, you can find examples of real-life librarians articulating the value in their community and making the case for continued funding and support. If you haven't seen it, we recently had a guest post from Emily Gilbert, who is a librarian at Rasmussen College. Emily ran for a library board seat in her community, and it's a really interesting story, and she talks about the experience in the post. Just know that we'll be hosting regular articles like these on our blog, so be sure to check back. Also, if you want to get instant notification of these news posts, you can subscribe to our marketing and public relations email list, which is a great thing for all libraries. Last thing, I just want a reminder that we have a ton of resources on our Census 2020 page on the Rails website. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to that Census 2020 email list. We also have recordings from previous events, including the program that took place in July at Burr Ridge, and the member update in January, where someone from the state library talks about the census in Illinois. There are also links to outside resources from organizations like ILA, ALA, and the Census Bureau. A lot of great stuff in there. Okay, so the next thing I have to talk about is this grant opportunity. So I'm just going to mention this really briefly because right now all we're doing is basically looking for feedback from libraries. We're going to submit a grant through the Illinois Department of Human Services. The funding will increase awareness on how to increase the self-response rate for hard to count communities. Funds will be awarded to community organizations or government entities to serve as central coordinators or regional intermediaries of census outreach efforts. So in turn, awards are going to go to local entities like libraries who are viewed as trusted messengers in their community. So right now, we want to hear from you about what you might do with the funds. We'll have a chance to talk about this at the end of the roundtable. So just keep this in mind while Ashley and Catherine are doing their presentation. We're going to come back to it during our discussion period, and we really want to hear from you. We've developed some prompts, questions for you to participate and give us your feedback. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley and Catherine to talk about services and resources related to the Census 2020. Ashley Johnson is the Business Outreach Librarian at Vernon Area Public Library, and Catherine Savage is the Head of Communications at the Vernon Area Public Library. Ashley and Catherine, welcome to you both.
Hello and good morning. Thank you again, Dan, for hosting us. We are too excited about the census. My name is Ashley Johnson, and I'm here with my colleague,
Catherine Savage. Hello.
And the first part of our session, we're going to talk about resources for your library's outreach plan as it relates to the census. What can you do as a library? What can you ask your community partners to do? And what more could you do if you had additional funding or in-kind donations, or if you go out for one of these awesome Rails grants that we're going to talk about? After the presentation, we'll do a question and answer and do some brainstorming about each of those things. And then we'll have a group discussion about what your libraries might have underway already. We would love to hear about it. And just give us all a chance to share, because none of us are as smart as all of us. And by the end of the day, you should have some idea of what you need to do next, and some ideas of what you might want to ask from this amazing opportunity that Rails is putting together for us.
So to quickly recap some concepts that were introduced in earlier Rails Census 2020 sessions, what is it we need to do to get ready for April 1st? The first and most important thing you need to get started with is identifying your hard-to-count population. You're going to get the biggest return by focusing your resources on the folks who are likely to go uncounted. You don't want to spend a lot of time talking to people who are already planning to fill out their census form. You're not going to get a gain from that. So who are those folks? Well, historically, those groups include a lot of groups that the library serves: young children, people of color, rural residents, low-income households, also non-English speaking households, folks with no internet, renters, immigrants, single-parent households, and people who distrust the government. So you surely have a good idea of some of these groups that might be part of your local library community. There are tools you can use, mapping tools, that will help you really whittle down for your area which of these sort of demographics you're going to find and in what concentration and where. So I encourage you to use these tools. We talked about them a little bit in the last roundtable, so you might revisit that recording, and then at the end of this presentation we've got some links. But you really don't need much of a lesson to use the hard-to-count mapping tools. It's pretty straightforward. So once you've identified your target audience, remember your goal is to get folks to successfully fill out a census form. That's a different goal than we have for many of our library public relations and marketing efforts, which tend to be about participation or engagement. This is really more like making a sale. So you're going to need to move your target audience from 0 to closing a deal with a filled out form, and that's going to take a few steps. The first of which is awareness. The folks need to know that the census is happening, but they need more than that. They need to understand what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and what it is they need to do to participate. Then we need to engage them emotionally. They need to believe that participating is important, and they need to feel assured that it is safe to do so. And finally, they need to fill out their form. They need to take action. So as you design your outreach campaign, you're going to keep all these things in mind. Yes, we need to reach folks with the message that, hey, the census is happening, but there's going to be more education and persuasion that needs to happen beyond that. And because a complete and accurate count is so important to your community, we really need to use every tool in the box, every weapon in the arsenal. It is all hands on deck. So we're going to take a three-pronged approach here today. We're going to talk about what you can do directly, what you can get your community partners to help with, and what you might need to do, or what you might need to seek even more resources to accomplish, and whether that be funding or donations. So next slide. First, let's talk about leveraging your library's resources. Use your communications channels. So anyone who is familiar with promoting things about the library, you already know what that toolbox looks like. Do you have a newsletter or an e-newsletter? Do you make posters or flyers or digital signage? What are those things can you point towards getting the message out that the census is happening and communicate some information about the census? You can employ your environmental signage. So do you have like a sandwich board at your front door or real estate signs that you could stick in your lawn? You could theme your book displays to be census related and include signage there. And all of those things are going to help with getting attention that the census is happening and helping further people's understanding of what's going to go on. Wait, I think I skipped some. Could you go back? There, programming and events. So you're going to want to take a look at each of your hard to count groups and consider how you might reach them also with your programming. That's another tool in your box. And our whole last Rails webinar was about using programming to turn out the count. So you might take a look at that whole recording, but just briefly I'll go over some examples. So small children are an undercounted group because many parents may not realize that small children count. So you've got a captive audience of parents and small children at all of your story times. How can you use story time to talk about the census and communicate with parents about what's going to happen and what's expected of them? You could theme programming around things like counting or inclusion. Those would be especially effective for children. You could do programming for adults about the census, or you could do programming for your business audience about how census data gets used to make business decisions. Or you could invite an elected official to come and talk about the census. So again, the Rails webpage on the census has a link to the recording from the last roundtable. Or if you'd like, I've got notes that I could send back out through the listserv that would sort of recap what we talked about. So if that's interesting to you, just stick it in the chat and we'll make sure that happens. And finally, you can use your library space to promote the census the same way that you promote any other library activity. So I know here at Vernon, and I believe some other neighboring libraries, we hosted the census, a table in our lobby as they're doing recruiting, because they're hiring 500,000 people right now to do the enumeration next year. So that would be something that would both call attention to it as well as serve other purposes.
So in addition to everything that you can do through your library and the outlets that you have within your library walls, let's think about who we can reach out to in the community to extend and amplify that effort. Remember, everyone in your community has a vested interest in there being a complete and accurate count. So if anybody if you're feeling like people are a little unmotivated, it's always a good idea to kind of remind them what the stakes are. It's hands on deck. It's all hands on deck. So everyone can help. If who in your community has communication channels that you can use? Who has a newsletter? Who has an e-newsletter? Look to your village, your school system, and your Chamber of Commerce. Who has a brochure rack or a bulletin board where you can put the info that you've put together in? Keep your eyes peeled as you move through your community for these opportunities. So if you're in a medical waiting room or a doctor's office, do they have a screen with a slideshow? Could you be a part of that? Could you give them some JPEGs to include in their slideshow? Who has a great community sign? Like those digital marquee signs that you see every bank has or every school has? Or who has a busy corner where you could set up a banner or I've seen organizations use box trucks and get kind of skins for the box truck to kind of make them movable billboards. These are the kind of people that you need to talk to and get on your side.
One super important group that you're going to want to reach out to are the trusted voices for each of your hard-to-count populations. So this is going to be especially important for audiences that maybe do not trust their government with their personal information. And so for this conveyance of messaging, you might look to a school teacher or an ESL teacher. It might be a faith worker or a social services worker. It could be a popular community personality or even a barber shop. But the bottom line is, where will your hard-to-count audience be? Where will they be open to hearing about the census and open to being persuaded that they should participate? Who can reach them in that place? Who do they trust? Those are the partners that are going to be the most important to this effort.
Yeah, and in addition to the physical, the paper, the newsletters, the boards, who in your community has events or there's gathering places that are in public places? Is that a good place where census outreach can happen? Who has an event that you can add a census presence to? I know that Gail Borden kicked off their Elgin Counts campaign at their city's 4th of July parade. Is that something that your library can do? Can you identify places where you can cross paths with your hard-to-count populations and set up form-filling stations there? With Chromebooks or tablets and the hotspots that you're going to go out and purchase just so you can do this outreach, or maybe your library already has these. Do you have a relationship with health clubs, or do you have a train station in your community, a local park, or an after-school program? Reach out to these places and see if you can make this happen. Finally, what talent resources might you tap from your board or your foundation or your business partners or networking groups? Do you know folks in your community who could ask for help, that you could ask for help with donations? People whose business it is to do video production or graphics, or perhaps an expertise with social media or pay-per-click advertising. That's going to be super important. Professionals who can make sure your online campaign is efficient and effective are, they are very important to this whole thing. So just spending some time to think about what else you might need for this campaign. And remember, everyone benefits from the count being complete and correct. That should be your mantra. This isn't just for you. It isn't just for the library. It is for your entire community. And that means it's in your community's best interest to make this campaign successful.
So I see a question came through the chat about what about complete count committees? They are already doing this and they're trying to collaborate to do this. And this is an excellent point. And I feel remiss that I've left this out. But if there is a complete count committee established in your area, be part of it. And this is the kind of activity that's going to be happening through the complete count committee.
Exactly.
If there's not a complete count committee in your area, you can start one and you can rally all of these resources under the heading Complete Count Committee. But even if you can't manage to do that formally, you can still do this. You can pull together your community team. It doesn't need to formally be a Complete Count Committee, although I suspect it would be to your advantage resource-wise to hook into them, but I have to say I haven't found that particularly easy to navigate. Perhaps someone can speak to that at the end. So we talked about what your library can do. We talked about what your community partners can do. And now let's talk about what could you do with unlimited funding and manpower. So, if you had the bank of talent and the pile of money to do the best possible job, what would that look like? And then we're going to consider whether those are things you want to pursue through grant funding, like this Rails grant, or you could look for other grants, or you could even turn to your friends or your foundation for help, or even your board or local business connections for in-kind or discounted services. But really think big. Think pie in the sky here. What would you do if everything was available to you? So some of the things you might need additional funding for would be printing. So if you're going to do informational flyers or you're going to use the materials that are available from census.gov, you might need 10,000 copies of that. So you could ask for money for additional printing. You could ask for money for posters or manufacturing banners to put up at corners. You could ask for media buys. So place advertising in your newspaper or on the radio or even on TV. One channel that you might consider are the specialty publications that are available in our area, those newspapers that are in languages other than English that are distributed for free at specialty groceries, restaurants, and businesses. That might be a real good way to reach some of the hard-to-count population in your area. You could ask for additional resources for production of all of these things. You know, we all have the same number of hours in a day, and this is extra for everybody because it only happens every 10 years. So do you need some help with an outside consultant to help with graphics or video production or social media expertise? Those are legit budget items that you could put on a grant. As Ashley mentioned, you could ask for money for technology. And the amazing thing about purchasing technology like tablets or Chromebooks and Wi-Fi hotspots that you're going to go out into the community and like have form-filling sessions out there at the park, at the train station, at the school, wherever you can reach your folks. Hey, come over, let's fill out this census form. You can keep that technology after the census is done. So this is kind of a win-win sort of pursuit. And you can ask for more manpower. So again, there's only so many of us. Maybe you just need more man hours. Maybe you need specialty services like translation. You could apply for a grant or seek resources in your community for any of these things. The last bit I'm just going to go over here are some other resources because this is so much. So I'm trying to whittle down to just the most useful portals that we found. And Ashley's going to chat out some of these links because they're not clickable on the screen. So the first two are the hard to count mapping tools that I've found most useful. One is from the census itself, just /Rome. Little note, it has to be lowercase. I've never seen a URL do this before, but if you uppercase it, it doesn't work. And then Census Hard to Count Maps 2020 is from CUNY, and I think that's a friendlier tool personally, but those will both help you like zoom in on the map to your service area, and it'll tell you who these populations are, how many folks you need to keep in mind, where they live, and even suggest some strategies about messaging. The census website itself has an enormous amount of information on it. The portal that I have found most useful is the one for partners, and that's going to include information about connecting with the Complete Count Committee in your area. There's a PDF that's an outreach toolkit that is extremely step-by-step and will help you get your head around all of this and walk you through the process. And then they've got tons of resources that are downloadable. So fact sheets and flyers and logos and social media graphics. And to whatever extent we can use the official census materials, I think it makes the most sense because you're gonna have that message amplified because that will be in other places as well. Inventing your own graphics as needed, but whatever you can do to just amplify their message, I think is gonna be a good way to go. Forefront is one of the partners in the area, and they were part of the Rails Census 2020 presentation in July, and they have an amazing trove of information for you as well, and there's their link. And then Rails itself kind of pulls together all of these links. It pulls together the listserv, and as we identify really useful resources, those will be added to that page. I want to add one more link here that's not on the page, and it's the Gail Borden video that I talked about earlier. I want to point out that you can accomplish a lot with one messaging piece, and I think this Gail Borden video is just like it's like the gold standard of messaging because it does more than just tell you that the census is happening. It explains what it is you need to do, and it really is like beautifully motivating about why it is important. And they showed it during the July meeting. So Ashley, that YouTube link that she just posted there goes straight to that part of the Rails 2020 presentation that shows the video. I would encourage you to take a look at it. And then if you didn't watch that session, please go back and watch the entire thing because it really is a good primer on what needs to get done and what's available to you to get it done. So I think we're going to segue now into group discussion. Dan's going to get some things started with instructions. Ashley and I will stay online to do some Q&A. And I believe Denise Raleigh from Gail Borden is with us online, and she is absolutely the expert on all of this stuff. So Denise, please jump in anytime with anything you want to add.
I think you're going to talk about this, Dan. I just want to make sure that everybody is talking to everyone, not all panelists, but include all panelists and attendees so we can see everyone's comments.
Yeah, thank you both. And someone pointed out to me that your toolbar is actually on the bottom of the screen, not on the top, as I may have mentioned before, which is an important point. Sorry for that. I have a different view, but that's great. So this is the portion of our roundtable where we want to hear from you. So as you can see, the chat option is on your online toolbar. So also when you send a chat, you have the option to send to just the panelists or panelists and attendees. Please choose that all panelists and attendees option when replying. That just helps everybody see it. Otherwise, it just goes to Catherine and Ashley and myself. So we want to hear from you. I'm going to put in the first question, and just note that I'm going to put in Q1. It always helps if you can sort of answer it using the A1 format so that questions correspond with the answers. In the meantime, if you have questions, questions for Ashley and Catherine or Denise, please send them out there. We want to, again, we want to hear from you. We want this to be a discussion about the things that you need. So feel free to keep that coming. Okay, so I will be typing this in here, and it might take me a second. You're going to hear me talk. Okay, there it is. Okay, and while we were waiting, there is a question. Are there academic libraries out there who will be doing Census 2020 activities? Catherine and Ashley, have you heard of academic libraries that are going to be doing those activities around the census?
So I believe populations on campuses get counted differently. They're considered part of like the group enumeration. I know my own daughter is going away to college this fall, and they will be doing a count like at the dorms. So I'd have to give some thought about what the role of an academic library would be in census outreach. There might be a valid role, it just isn't springing to mind right now.
Great. Okay. And if anybody on the on the online forum knows the answer to that question, please feel free to chime in. If anybody has heard of universities or colleges that are doing Census 2022 activities, tell us about it. We want to know about it. We have another question. It came in. Hold on one second. From Brian. Brian asks, I understand the need to coordinate with your village or town. Who should I look for in local government that would be good contacts? Good question.
In my experience, I've worked with village managers and assistant village managers. We're a district library, so we have multiple villages, but also a great contact just in general for me as the business librarian is the economic development officers at the villages, if you have those. So I know to actually form an official complete count committee, you have to have the highest elected person in the village initiate that process. But I think most of the work actually is done with village managers, depending on your village, obviously.
Great. Okay, so to answer that question about academic universities, Edmund says a local college is part of our Complete Count Commission. That's okay. Great to hear about that. That's I'm very excited that people are hearing that. So also a question came in. I have a couple of retired people who would like to help collect census data. What is a good starting point for them? Ashley and Catherine, do you have a sense of that?
Well, it would, the census employment process. I don't have the URL right on.
Just census.gov/employment or /jobs. It's something very straightforward like that.
If someone wants to find that for us and put it into the chat box. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Oh, it's 202-2020. There you go.
You got it. Great. Okay. Thank you, Edmund.
And I do know that I had a really easy time scheduling those job kind of tables here at the library. So they'll do it frequently and quickly if you have some time. I paired that with the exiting of a large scale program. So they were there to kind of talk to people when 100 people were exiting a program. So I thought that was kind of a good way to schedule that because,
Want to get back to the question at hand. So question one, what services and resources do you currently offer in regards to the census? We have some great answers out there. Christy says, we have met with one of the census coordinators from our area and post signs for hiring census counters. That's great. Again, people are just seeing that that libraries, connecting the dots between libraries and the census. Let's see here, another one. Let's see here. Sarah says nothing yet. We are developing a flyer for the community. I've contacted our city hall. They won't address until March. Okay. Alicia says, please reach out to your counties. Okay, that's a good tip. That's important to note that people, not just looking in their local municipalities, villages, and towns, but also talk to your county folks. Barbara says, just an idea. We reached out to our League of Women Voters, and they are sponsoring parentheses paying for a program in September here at the library from Forefront Anita Benjari. the league might be good partners in your area. Okay, great. Yeah, the League of Women Voters. That's a great tip. Thank you, Barbara, for that. Okay, census jobs. You can also call 855-562-2020 in Federal Relay Service. That's a good tip. Thank you for that, Judy. Really appreciate that. Sarah Alexander says, current library employee went door to door in 2020 for hard to count people. That's amazing. He was met with guns and guard doors. That's not amazing. He won't help in 2020. I'm sorry to hear that. You really excited me with that first part of that statement. And then,
can I jump in here, Dan? I think that this example is a great reason to get in before March. Sarah, I think this is the same person, but that's a great reason to make sure that your community knows what's happening before the flyers actually sent out. So if they self-report, no one is coming to their door, and there's no reason to meet anyone with guns and guards at your doors.
Tina answered the first question with at Plainfield. We talked with our census representative to make sure our homeless population will be counted. They will come and do a special count day for us. That's great. Thank you for that, Tina. I also want to get to I think some of you probably have questions about this grant. And Denise did a great job of answering or making some suggestions here. Denise says right now the Rails grant is anticipated to also encompass some of the collar counties, God, excuse me. So there will be more networking on these grants with the municipalities. Yeah, thank you again for that, Denise. Of course, no one can guarantee how the new grant money will be granted to intermediaries. Of course, great point. Okay. All right, fantastic. Barbara says, our newspaper plans to do an article about why people should fill out the forms this fall for early exposure. Yeah, that's great. That's just another locally trusted source asking about those things. And Jane says, yes, Rails is applying for a grant for the collar counties. Those are Lake, McHenry, Kane, DuPage, Kendall, Will, Grundy, and Kankakee counties. Okay, these are all great. Again, if you have questions for Catherine and Ashley, please feel free to send them. In the meantime, I'm going to enter the second question. If you have responses to that first question that you are still working on, please keep them coming. We want to hear from you. And in the meantime, we'll get this second one underway.
And I'm just going to jump in here. I see Barbara notes that their newspaper plans to do an article about why people should fill out forms this fall for early exposure. And PR is a whole other tool in your box. So I will dangle this carrot in front of you. If you watch the July Census 2020 Rails presentation, there is an amazing example of how to generate PR excitement around the census in that presentation. And I'm not going to tell you what it is.
A little Easter egg. I like that. Yeah, you gotta watch it. We're not going to tell you. You got to watch it. Okay. Okay, Lisa asks, this is a good question, Lisa, thank you. Are the census questionnaires done, and do we know what questions are going to be asked?
That's what I'm looking for right now. I sent Catherine yesterday. There is a draft, not a draft, but what they will be getting in paper. It is available. It will be different when they get it, because it will include web addresses, which they haven't made public yet, and I think phone numbers, other information to be able to contact them directly. But the form is out, and you can see what it will look like. It's really, I think, important for library staff to get comfortable with it. Once I find that link, I'll post it in the chat.
Yeah, the problem that I find is there is a huge trove of information and resources for census, and so just finding something like, well, where's the demonstration form can be a little bit challenging, which is why I think we're trying to whittle some of this stuff down on that Rails census webpage to get you just quickly to the key stuff.
I found it. I'm going to post it in there. There you go.
Oh, thank you, Ashley.
No problem.
So Amy, good question. Did I hear that people will be able to do the census online this year, or is it only by written form? And then Alicia, thank you for answering that question. The 2020 census will be done online, not on paper primarily. Libraries, I just lost it. hold on. Libraries will be essential for providing internet access so that to people so that they can complete the census. Yeah, thank you for that. We should really helpful. Okay, let's see here. Sarah says, I went to a presentation at Moline Public Library this year by people from the Census Bureau. On flyer page 8, they listed all the reasons why we should fill out the census form. I will look for it if you're interested. Oh, we are definitely interested. Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that.
I mean, the bottom line for why you should participate in the census is because it's going to determine political representation and funding for your community for the next 10 years. And if you wake up the day after the census ends and you realize that your community has been drastically undercounted, you do not have an opportunity to fix that until 2030. So think about what it would be like to spend the next 10 years in an area that is overburdened and underfunded. I don't think that's a picture that anyone in our community wants. Like, our youth librarians right now are teaching kids to read. We wouldn't dream of injecting those kids then into a public school system that is overburdened and underfunded for the next 10 years till they're in the 10th grade, right? So we really need to have no regrets at the end of this census enumeration. I'm not kidding. It is probably the most important thing you can spend your next 9 months on. So really consider how much you can devote to this, because it's that important.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That is so true. And Denise, I'm not going to read this all of this, but Denise does have some great suggestions on how to prepare for the grant and the recommendations. I really appreciate you putting in there. I also want to mention that Tina said, in Plainfield, we have a number of churches who hold services in languages other than English. We would like to reach out to them as well as Del Valle, our Migrant Workers Center. We also need to reach out to larger renter community. Yeah, don't forget about those renter communities. Those are definitely important. And then Denise says, the census anticipates that 95% will be completed online. So that's yeah, very useful. So remember to keep those answers coming in for question 2. If you were to receive grant funds to help you with census services resources, how would you use those funds? What would you hope to accomplish? Ashley and Catherine, do you have, well, I mean, you've already talked a lot about what you at Vernon hope to accomplish, but do you have a sense of how you would use the funds? What areas they would go to?
I was just trying to think. I think for us, it would definitely be the paper. We have a lot. We're a large district. We cover a lot of ground, and I know that it would be a burden on our partners to expect them to print things out, but it would also cost to be able to support such a large endeavor for such a large district. So I think paper is a great resource, and having those tools to go out into the community. I think we're kind of lucky in that we have a lot of these things already that we can kind of put into action, but the paper and the media buys are very important.
Yeah, for me, it would be some sort of social media consulting services. I have to admit that I am not as savvy about paid advertising on social media as I know is available in the community. Like, we have experts who know about this stuff that would help us spend those dollars most efficiently. But I do think Ashley touched on it, that the reason that she and I are kind of doing this is because our library is pretty well resourced, and we have enough room in our schedule to try to tackle some of this. And we really want to make sure that the communities that don't have the resources we do, who are going to be really important in the census count, have the tools that they need to get done what they need to get done.
We had a question come in that I think is important to address here. Carol asks, what is the actual timeline for completing the census?
So they'll, you want to do it? Okay, so they'll start mailing them out in about mid-March, and the mailing of these postcards will give you a code that you go to the website and fill out your census form for the people in your household. And then if you don't do it by July 31st, I believe, if you don't self-report, is when they kind of start bugging you. So they'll send you additional postcards, and then I think you get, I don't want to misspeak. It's maybe 5, I think they'll send to you. And then that's when they send the enumerators to your household if you haven't self-reported. And they, I think, will only come once. In the past, they would continue to come until they make contact with you, but funding and things have gotten in the way, so that's why I think they're only going to come once. And then it kind of gets counted, and they have to report to the federal government and the president by December 31st.
I want to go back to the answers about the question, what would you do with the funds? Barbara had a great answer. Technology and hotspots to reach out to our housing areas and elder housing high rises. Thank you, Barbara. I appreciate that. Also, Alicia had a question. What about people that struggle with computers or technology? How can we best reach them? Catherine and Ashley, do you have any suggestions on that particular topic?
Well, I think this is the reason that libraries really need to engage this. We are trusted voices. We are already helping people that struggle with computers and technology every day. So if you haven't already, I think it's a great plan to talk with administrators in your library and get all of your frontline staff comfortable and give them the answers to the questions that are most likely to be asked, and let them know what their lines are as far as service. Can they sit down with a patron? Should they be filling out a form for them? Just making sure that libraries are as comfortable with the process, or librarians or library staff with the process as they can be, and knowing what they can and can't do.
All right, thank you so much. Jane, thank you for jumping in. Jane, my colleague Jane from Rails says, if you are interested in applying for it to be a subrecipient grant through Rails, make sure to take out those eligibility requirements. Some of the required registrations take time, especially the sam.gov account. Denise says our regional subcommittee is planning to hold Census Sundays with mobile units. That's a cool idea. Brian, I'd love to hear ideas about programs. I'm having a hard time imagining successful programs for encouraging the census. Brian, you are in luck because we did an entire Rails roundtable about this very issue about 2 weeks ago, and you can watch that on the Rails YouTube page online. It's free to watch. Also, Amy answered that question, says, Brian, all of my programming will include food and bribes. That's a good one. Definitely a good one to use. And then Amy had an answer to the question, to the Q2. If I could get grant funds, I would love to get a tablet or 2 to bring to our homebound patrons to help them fill out the census. And maybe a laptop or 2 to leave in the library for those who come into the library because they have nowhere else to go. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, there's some great comments and questions coming in, but I'm gonna drop the third question in here. Have you sought grants or partnerships with other organizations in regards to the census? If so, where and with whom? So just remember, if you're answering that, you wanna put the A3, that will just help us organize the question in the chat box a little bit. And in the meantime, Tina said those with low computer skills can do the census by phone and paper, even though online is preferred. Is that correct? Ashley and Catherine, I'm pretty sure that is true, isn't it?
Yeah, so 20% of people that they've identified as hard to count will initially get a paper form. 80% will be asked to fill it out online. You can ask for it. I'm not sure about them sending it out if you don't, that you'll get a paper a month after if you don't reply with the postcard. I'm not quite sure about that. The whole point is to reduce costs, right? So from 2010 to 2020, they didn't get a boost in budget for how much the census is supposed to cost federally. So they're really just trying to make it work with what they have. And I'm sure that, like us, paper costs money, and they're trying to reduce as many paper form filling outs as they can. So
Yeah, and there was another question from Sarah. If is there a place to go online see what the form looks like? Catherine, thank you for including the link to that sample. That's the paper form, but we're thinking that it will look exactly like the digital version. So that's great. Um, Also, and Alicia, thank you. She also echoed that response. I heard that they will get the paper copy a month after they get the postcard, and then they can also do phone calls. Yes, that's accurate. Yep.
Can
So
I really quick, so we've talked about kids a couple times in this webinar, and I just want to mention that kids are difficult not only because people forget about them, hopefully not too often, but that if you are in a household that is, like a single parent or they share custody of a kid, that is a challenge. So children's librarians, youth librarians that are working, and if you can figure out a way to talk about that, I think that would be very helpful, because that's a big piece as to why they get undercounted, because they're sharing time across households, and that's confusing. So if you spend more than half of your time in one household, that's the rule. Or if it's half and half, where the child is sleeping on the day of April 1st is kind of the strong rule. You can find documentation on this from the Census website, and I think it's just that's going to be a hard one, and I think it's an important thing to be able to pair it quickly to people that have questions.
yeah, thank you for that. That's very true. Just want to kind of circle back to some of these answers about question 3. Have you sought grants or partnerships with organizations in regards to the census? If so, where and with whom? Amy says local community foundations. That's a great one. Denise put that link on there to the Gail Borden census page, and she said you can see the types of partners that we have in Elgin that are already engaged. Thank you, Denise. Great examples. Christy says, I've not started yet, but today's webinar inspired me to reach out to our city leaders. That's great. And especially our economic development person. Additionally, I envision us having a computer or 2 dedicated to census use, as well as hosting coffee count events. Ooh, yeah, where we have food, laptops, and people could help. That's amazing. Thank you, Christy. That's really fun to hear. Okay, and we have about 10 minutes left, and I know that some of you might still be answering that 3rd question, but I do have 2 more to get to, so I'm going to put the 4th question in there. If you still want to answer the 3rd, please do just put A3 in front of your answer. And here's question 4. A big part of the grant is knowing the hard-to-count areas within your community. Do you know what this looks like in your area? If so, what is your plan of reaching those folks? All right, and Barbara also says, this is a good comment. I was hoping that if Rails gets the grant, that individual libraries under them would not have to go through the federal grant eligibility process. I'm not sure about that, if that's possible, Barbara, but I do appreciate you asking about that. And Ashley, thanks for putting that link in there to information about counting kids, because that is truly an important part.
Well, and they are a hard to count area. I mean, all of our communities are different, but I'm assuming we all have kids in our community, and they are a kind of the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to HTCs.
Also, for folks that might have lingering questions for Ashley and Catherine, you can still ask them. We will try to get to those as quickly as we can in the time remaining. But yeah, what about Catherine and Ashley, for you? You've talked a lot about hard to count areas. What does it look like in your area? And can you talk a little bit more in depth about what your plan is for reaching those folks?
We have a huge population of sort of new immigrants, and we have a huge population of folks who speak languages other than English. So I think that's going to be a particular challenge in our area. Do we have a plan yet? Not yet. Working on it. We're kind of formulating our own plan and then sharing it with you guys as it's going. So we don't have all these answers yet.
Yeah. Another hard to count population for us are seniors. I think we have 37% of the people that live in our community are over the age of 65. So where are they? How are we communicating with them? And how can we make sure that in addition to helping them with ebooks and audio and digital resources, how can we be the first place that they think of when it comes to filling out the first digital census? I think that's a really big part of this. We have a lot of talk about the census, but I haven't heard any kind of mainstream media discussion on the fact that it's an expectation that you fill it out online. And I know, being on the reference desk myself on occasion, that the moving towards everything being online is very frustrating for seniors. So filling out your taxes online, doing job applications online, this is just going to add to the frustration and something that is a barrier and a perceived barrier for seniors. So I am preparing myself for them to be a hard to count community for us.
Yeah, well spoken. Lisa, good question. Are there any legal issues that we should be aware of when helping patrons fill out forms?
I have this question all the time, Lisa. I don't know. I do know that privacy is something that libraries really obviously believe in, and privacy is something that the census, that's the Bureau, believes in. So I guess leaning on the fact that the work that they do with you and the work that they're doing on secure library computers is private, but as far as how far you can go as a library professional in helping them, I really don't know. If I find the documentation, I will definitely put it on the census listserv, but as it stands, there are challenges. What if somebody fills it out wrong? Are you responsible for that as a person that helped them? I really don't know what the rules are.
There's definitely a helpline that the census has set up. And so it will be the case that you can set expectations for staff at a certain level, and then anything that goes beyond that level can be referred to this helpline. And then the helpline is also going to have language services. So if you are working with a patron who you do not share a language, you can connect them via the helpline to the help that they need to get. I think Denise, is texting about it right now. There's definitely staff training resources out there that were talked about in an earlier webinar, and maybe we can pull some of those links together and put them on the Rails page, because I know that's something that we're all going to want to pursue early next year. So.
I do know that I recently met with Jill Swirsky from the Evanston Public Library, and she talked about how they're planning on getting a fleet of kind of track phones and making a room or setting aside a space to have kind of a phone bank set up for people that need that foreign language support, to be able to go in and call privately in a private way. They are people that might be having some fear, and so their idea is making this a safe and private space that they can fill out the form.
Oh, I really like that idea. That's really cool. Okay, we've had some people answer the question for, so I want to get to those. Remember, the question was, a big part of the grant is knowing the hard to count areas within your community. Do you know what it looks like in your area? If so, how are you planning to reach those people? Amy says, with a large population without access to computers or the internet, we will be having weekly mobile events. Thanks, Amy. Christy says, one of our biggest target audiences is people without technology. Our library is in a rural area that is also high in poverty. So providing people with both computers and internet access, some areas have either no or very weak internet connections. Great, thank you. Also, there was the answer about, Lisa asked about legal issues. Denise said we have one census training by the census, and they will try to do more to cover those type of issues. Thank you, Denise. Yeah, that's great. Sarah says, I think you can help them log in, show them how to move through the fields, but you can't fill out the form on the data. Barbara says maybe Rails could have a webinar playing the steps for becoming eligible for federal grants. I appreciate that, Barbara. That's helpful. And Did I miss? Oh yeah, Joe did say thank you to my colleague Joe Philippek. Rails is working with the Midwest Census Office to schedule a training intended for front library staff that would address how to work with patrons on filling out the form.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. Denise says, we have a big Hispanic community that is one of our hard to reach communities. We have identified that they are very apprehensive because of the recent immigration raids, separation of families, etc. That could be a big challenge to county and the community. Any suggestions on how to overcome these issues? Yeah, that is very tough. Catherine and Ashley, in the last 2 minutes that we have, do you want to address that?
You know what? If I had the answer to that question, I feel like I would be doing something different.
I mean, it is the case that the census data is like protected under a million layers of privacy protections. The census data doesn't get shared with other government agencies at all. It's like in a lockbox. But helping people trust that that is the case is definitely going to be a challenge.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I know that is a tough question. Thank you, Denise, for that question. Okay, so Brian, one last question, and I think we're going to have to call it a day here. Brian says it looks like the online form can be filled out in several languages. Should we think about making non-English keyboards available?
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, Brian. Okay, and let's see here. Thank you, Felicia, for providing that census hard to count maps 2020. Denise says, Jane, please jump in. I believe Rails is planned to. Yeah, Rails you'll be hearing a lot more about this grant. And if you want to hear about it, please sign up for that Census 2020 email list. It's found on the Rails library. Or found on the Rails website. We'll make all of this information available there. You'll be able to get a copy of this recorded online roundtable there, also from our YouTube page. There will be a ton more information coming on that email list. So I think at this point, I'm going to bring this to a close. I really want to thank Ashley and Catherine so much for joining, and for everyone who participated, because there was a lot of great participation today. As a reminder, you'll get a follow-up email for signing up for this roundtable. It'll come tomorrow, and it will have links to all of this information. If you have any questions, reach out to us here at Rails. You can email communication@railslibraries.info, and we will respond and connect you to the correct area. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day. Good luck with all of your census programs.
Bye. Thank you.